Later, everyone would ask me why I never told anyone about that agreement when we got married 7 years ago. I never answered. Because I was waiting for him to tear up the script himself. I just didn't expect him to do it on national television, holding another woman's hand, calling her his soulmate, while I sat in the front row wearing the earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. A gift he'd picked out with Sylvia, as I'd later discover, from a jeweler in Milan where they'd met for a business trip 2 years before he ever touched her hand in public. 72 hours after the gala, I pulled out the brown envelope from beneath my sofa cushion, the one with his signature, his fingerprint, and a clause he'd forgotten he ever wrote. He'd added it himself, scrawled in pen at the bottom of the page. These terms apply equally to both parties. Whoever breaks it first loses everything. He thought he was being clever. He thought he'd trapped me. He was right about one thing: someone was trapped. He just had the wrong person. That night was when it all began. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment he made his announcement and I made my decision. On the 7th anniversary of our marriage, Leonard took another woman's hand at the company gala, in front of every media outlet in the city. That woman was not me, sitting in the first row of the family section. The ballroom lights dimmed. A single spotlight followed them across the floor. Leonard wore a charcoal gray custom suit. The cufflinks were a limited edition I'd spent a month choosing for his birthday last year. Sapphire, supposedly only 20 pairs in existence. I remembered the afternoon I'd sat with the jeweler, comparing shades of blue under different lights, because I wanted them to match his eyes exactly. I'd been so proud when he opened the box on his birthday morning. He'd smiled, kissed my forehead, said, "Perfect, Vivian. You always know exactly what I want." Then he'd put them in his drawer and worn them exactly twice in 12 months. The woman wore a champagne-colored mermaid gown, her hair swept into an elegant French twist, a pair of pearls at her ears catching the light as they dangled from his palm. Those pearls had been a gift from him, I knew. I'd seen the receipt on his desk 6 months ago, filed under business expenses. 6 months ago he'd told me he was working late on a merger. He'd come home at midnight smelling of perfume he said was from a client's wife. He raised the microphone and announced he had something of vital importance to share. The media section raised their cameras in unison. Flashes crackled like a swarm of fireflies. The woman's lips curved into a practiced smile. Leonard's thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand. "This is Sylvia Ching," his voice boomed through the ballroom speakers. "My most important business partner. And the most important person in my life." He paused after "most important." That 1-second pause was deliberate, stretched thin like taffy. The ballroom went so quiet I could hear the champagne bubbles burst in their flutes. "My soulmate," he said. I sat in the audience, my glass of lemon water perfectly still. A woman in an emerald cheongsam whispered something to her husband, her voice low but not low enough. "Mrs. Liu, and how pitiful," drifted across the gap. Another woman, someone I'd hosted at my dinner parties for years, actually turned in her seat to look at me, her expression a careful mask of sympathy that didn't quite hide the gleam of satisfaction beneath. The lights came back up. Leonard walked Sylvia off the stage, never once glancing toward the family section. As they passed me, the champagne-colored hem brushed my shoe. Sylvia tilted her head and gave me the faintest smile, the kind that says, "You lost," without a single word. I set down my lemon water, picked up my clutch and walked along the wall toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble, the sound swallowed by the ballroom's roar. At the door, Leonard's assistant Derek Zhou caught up. Miss Shen now." I turned my head. Derek's face tightened. He'd called me Mrs. Liu for 7 years. Today he'd switched, which meant he'd been instructed. "Mr. Liu asked me to tell you to go home and rest." Derek lowered his voice. "Miss Ching will be staying at the tower tonight. For the next few days, he'd appreciate it if you could." "Appreciate what?" I smiled. "That he's going to announce our divorce?" Derek's expression froze for a beat. His mouth opened and closed. I walked past him, pushing through the heavy double doors into the hallway. The moment they swung shut behind me, the noise and music were severed like a blade had cut through them, leaving only the low hum of the HVAC at the corridor's end. Autumn night air rushed in from the building entrance, lifting the hem of my coat. I didn't look back. My phone buzzed in my bag. Leonard's name on the screen. "Go home. We'll talk later." 7 words. Not a single punctuation mark. I stared at the screen for 2 seconds, my thumb hovering, then locked it and dropped it back in my purse. Stepping through the revolving doors, the night air hit my face, cool, carrying the faint sweetness of osmanthus. Streetlights stretched the shadows of plane trees across the asphalt in a loose web. I stood at the top of the steps, watching the headlights and taillights of endless traffic smear red and white ribbons across rain-washed puddles, and remembered what he'd said as he walked me into the Civil Affairs Bureau 7 years ago. Vivian Shin, from now on, everything I have is yours. Everything he had. Which back then was nothing. A rented apartment, a car with a lien on it, a business idea that was going nowhere. I gave him my father's network, my family's reputation, my name. I gave him access to people who'd never have taken his call otherwise. And he gave me what? A 7-year performance. A carefully maintained illusion that I was the lucky one. The wife who'd trapped a rising star into marriage through the power of her family's money. That was the story he told everyone. That was the story Sylvia believed. The truth was simpler. He came to me. He begged. And I said yes because I was desperate and young and foolish enough to think that gratitude could grow into love. Leonard came home at 2 a.m. I sat in the armchair by the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room, lights off, phone in hand, the digital copy of the divorce agreement glowing on my screen. Outside, the city slept, scattered building lights like spilled stars. December cold had fogged the glass. I'd drawn a line through the condensation with my finger, and the water trail ran down like an unfinished tear. The front door lock clicked. His footsteps paused. He hadn't expected the living room to be lit, though it wasn't, just the moon through uncurtained windows carving furniture from shadow. He flicked on the entryway light, warm yellow spilling across his charcoal suit. His tie was loosened, top 2 shirt buttons undone, and on the back of his neck, a faint pink mark. I'd seen that mark before. Once 2 years ago when he'd come home from a business trip to Milan and told me he'd slept badly on the plane. Still up. His voice carried exhaustion tinged with a flicker of annoyance. Not even the courtesy of, "Why aren't you asleep?" "The gala tonight," I said evenly. "You didn't tell me in advance." He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over the sofa arm, rubbing his temples. "It was a last-minute thing. Sylvia had a partnership announcement, so we bundled them together. Don't overthink it. Just optics. Just optics." I repeated the words, rolling them across my tongue like smooth, cold glass beads. "You took another woman's hand in front of every camera in the city, called her your soulmate, and told me it's just optics." Leonard's brow creased. He walked to the center of the room and finally looked at me directly. His gaze lingered for 2 seconds, assessing whether I'd cried, whether I'd make a scene. My calm expression seemed to surprise him. "Vivian Shin," he used my full name, his tone dropping. "You know exactly what this marriage was from the start. Enlighten me." I put my phone face down on my knee and looked up at him. 7 years ago your family was in crisis. You came to me. You said you needed a marriage to stabilize things. I agreed, on the condition that I join your family's business and get access to your father's network. Fair trade. He sat on the opposite sofa, crossing his legs, fingers resting on his knee, relaxed as if negotiating a settled deal. "How much have I held up your end at Lou Corp? You know the answer. So now that you've found a better partner, you can just toss me aside in public?" "I'm not tossing you aside." The first trace of real irritation crept into his voice. "I can give you a dignified separation. The house, money, company shares. I won't shortchange you. You can still hold your head up in this circle." "Hold my head up." I laughed softly, rose, and walked to stand before him. The lamp on the side table cast our shadows on the wall. His shorter because he was seated, mine looming over him. "Leonard, do you remember what you said at the Civil Affairs Bureau 7 years ago?" His expression faltered. "Vivian Shin, from now on everything I have is yours." I quoted his own words back at him. He looked away, undoing another shirt button, his voice lowering. "That was then. Do you remember what you signed?" His brow furrowed. What did I sign? My thumb had already found the fingerprint sensor. The screen lit up and I slid my hand beneath the sofa cushion, pulling out a brown craft envelope, the wax seal still intact. Inside, a prenuptial agreement bearing his signature and fingerprint lay quietly, its edges slightly yellowed. I hadn't even turned the paper toward him before he stepped forward. "When did you?" The morning after you needed my family's resources in a hurry. You signed it in your office break room. I angled the paper so the fingerprint and company seal caught the warm light from the side table. Forgot. You needed that 2 million bridge loan. You said you'd sign first and have your lawyer review it later. His pupils contracted. Leonard stared at the line circled in red ink, his Adam's apple bobbing. Should the male party initiate divorce proceedings, or publicly declare the relationship broken without the female party's consent? He read aloud, his voice dropping syllable by syllable. This shall constitute a voluntary waiver of all equity, real estate and investment holdings acquired during the marriage. When I asked you to sign, you added a line yourself. I turned the page, pointing to the bottom where he'd scrawled in pen, the above terms apply equally to the female party. You wouldn't sign without that addendum. Fair, you said, mutual terms. Whoever breaks it first loses everything. He fell silent. Not the silence of guilt. The silence of a sharp mind calculating options, weighing leverage. I knew it too well. 7 years. Every major decision he made came with that exact face. Brow slightly pinched, mouth pulling down at the corner, eyes darting once fast like a fox counting moves on a chessboard. How long have you been with Sylvia? I asked. His gaze lifted from the agreement to me. Tell me the truth and we can part ways cleanly. A few seconds passed. 2 years. 2 years. I turned those words over in my mind. 730 days. He'd learned to pick restaurants patiently, wait for her signals, call at odd hours, and still only sent me 7 words in a message. 730 days and he couldn't spare a single extra syllable for me. You called her your soulmate at the gala. You called her Sylvia. I folded the agreement back into the envelope. You've never once called me that. Vivian, calm down. This agreement might not even hold up in court. Whether it holds up isn't up to you. I stepped closer, brushing past his shoulder, turning my phone screen toward him. My lawyer's contact info. Top-tier firm, 20 years specializing in marital property disputes, highest settlement 9 figures, undefeated record. Mr. Zhou will be here at 9 tomorrow morning. You'll sign a new divorce agreement. If you sign, we end this with dignity. If you don't, I'll make the original public and pursue legal action. Do you think the Chengs will wait for your Sylvia if that happens? Leonard's face finally cracked. The calculating fox mask shattered at the edges. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you the truth. I locked my phone and pocketed it, pausing beside him, my voice dropping soft. 7 years, Leonard. I played along for 7 years. Now you've torn up the script yourself. I don't have to act anymore. I'd played the devoted wife for 7 years. I'd cooked his meals, hosted his clients, smiled at his board members. I'd learned his coffee order, his mother's birthday, his favorite wine. I'd sat through interminable dinners with his business associates, laughed at his jokes, touched his arm in the right way at the right moments. And all the while, I'd been quietly building a file that would one day bring him to his knees. He thought I was waiting for him to come home. I was waiting for him to slip up. 3 days after Leonard left, the entire city was buzzing with the news. The Liu family's live-in son-in-law publicly holds hands with the Qing heiress. I sat in my apartment study, scrolling through headlines that grew more lurid by the minute. Liu Corp CO escorts mysterious woman to private residence. 7-year marriage ends. Xin heiress allegedly moved out. Qing heiress wins inner circle approval. Intimate photos leaked. Every article pointed to the same conclusion. Vivian Xin had been discarded. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since 8 that morning. Relatives, friends, former colleagues, all calling in rotation to check on me. I answered a few. Each started with, "Vivian, are you okay?" before pivoting to probe about Leonard and Sylvia. The last call was from Leonard's aunt. "Auntie Lou," I cut her off gently, "Leonard and I will handle this ourselves. How's your back? Did you ever see that specialist?" 2 seconds of silence on her end. Then she laughed awkwardly and said, "Well, you young people sort it out," and hung up in a hurry. Then my phone rang again. A number I hadn't seen in years. Margaret, a former friend who'd ghosted me after my father's arrest. I answered out of curiosity. "Vivian, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Listen, if you need anything, a place to stay, someone to talk to." "Margaret," I said, keeping my voice light, "didn't you tell me 3 years ago that associating with me was bad for your image?" A beat of silence. Well, things were different then. Things are still different now. I smiled into the phone. You're calling because you think I'll be single soon and you want back in. I'm not. So you can go back to whatever you were doing 3 years ago. I hung up before she could respond. The satisfaction was small, but it was real. Another call came through, Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, who'd cut me off when my father's scandal broke. Vivian, darling, I saw the news. I knew he was no good. I told your mother that at the wedding. I'm sure you did, Aunt Margaret. But you also told my mother she shouldn't speak to me after Daddy's trial. So I'll take your concern with the appropriate grain of salt. He sputtered something about family loyalty, and I hung up. The phone kept ringing. I let it. I had more important things to focus on. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The sky outside was gray-blue, clouds low like a wet rag wrung out over the office towers. Downstairs, someone was walking a golden retriever that kept chasing its own tail, circling 3 times before flopping onto the pavement, panting. I watched that for a while until my gaze drifted to the brown craft envelope on my desk. 7 years ago, I'd carried that same envelope through a hospital corridor at 2 a.m, waiting for Leonard. My father had just been taken for questioning. All our accounts were frozen. I'd run out of the hospital in slippers, stood on the curb for half an hour before flagging a taxi. When I reached his apartment, he'd just come back from a bar, collar askew, shirt stained with liquor. Leonard, I need a marriage. Can you help me? His laugh had sent a chill down my spine. Vivian Shin, you're begging me to marry into your family? Think carefully about what you're asking. He bit down on the word begging, as if settling some old score. And his interest in my father's network, the one no one had ever fully cracked, hung over the table like a weight I couldn't name. I'd known even then at 25, that I was making a deal with someone who saw me as a transaction. But I was young and scared, and my father's name was mud, and I had nowhere else to turn. So I said yes. And I promised myself I'd never be that desperate again. He joined Lou Corp and climbed fast. He used the Shin family connections to land key deals, used the grateful son-in-law image to polish his reputation. Every magazine profile, every industry award, every fawning interview, he always mentioned how lucky he was to have married into such a supportive family. He never mentioned that I was the one who'd vetted his first major partnership, negotiated his salary, designed the marketing strategy that put him on the map. He never mentioned any of it. Sylvia Ching appeared 2 years ago. I sensed it from the way his phone buzzed at odd hours, the way he started guarding his screen, the way he'd be working late, and come home smelling of a perfume I'd never bought. I sensed it but never investigated, not because I didn't care but because I was waiting. Waiting for him to play this scene to its climax, for everyone to see it, for it to be too late to take back. That afternoon, Sylvia Ching asked to meet me. She chose the most expensive French restaurant in the Eastern District, booked the whole place. When I arrived, she was already seated by the window, 2 black-suited bodyguards standing behind her. One pulled out my chair with the expression of a dead robot. Sylvia wore a cream cashmere coat over an emerald silk blouse, a Cartier panther brooch at her collar. Her hair was down today, waves cascading over her shoulders, the pearls replaced with diamonds that caught the light hard enough to sting. A glass of sparkling water sat untouched before her, condensation pooling on the white linen. When I sat down, she closed the menu and set it aside, her lips curving into a gracious smile, the kind that says, I know you've lost but I won't rub it in. I'd seen that smile before in the faces of women who'd invited me to their charity galas and then spent the evening whispering about my father's conviction. The smile of people who'd already written my ending and were waiting for me to live it out. Miss Shin, thank you for coming. You invited me, I said. How could I say no? I draped my coat over the chair back, matching her tone perfectly. A waiter brought a pot of Earl Grey, the cream white teapot limited edition handmade, the restaurant's crest on the cup base. Sylvia poured for me with practiced elegance, like a hostess receiving a guest. I watched her hands, steady, manicured, no tremor. He was good at this. She'd probably rehearsed the conversation in her head a dozen times. Miss Shin, I wanted to talk to you about Leonard. Go ahead. I've known Leonard for over 2 years. She slid the cup toward me, steam curling at her fingertips. I know you've been married for 7. He told me your marriage was, well, for practical reasons. He also said he's always felt regret about how things turned out between you. Regret about what? About not finding the right person at the right time. She held my gaze, her eyes clear and direct. Miss Shin, I know this is uncomfortable to hear. But I hope you understand, Leonard and I are not impulsive. We've thought seriously about our future. I lifted the cup and took a sip. The tea scalded my tongue, but I didn't set it down. I swallowed slowly, letting the heat settle. Sunlight slanted through the window, laying a warm gold patch on the white tablecloth. So you're asking me to let go, I said. I'm asking you to be generous. She corrected my phrasing, her tone gentle but certain. Do you love him? If you do, you should know that holding on to someone who doesn't love you hurts everyone. If you don't, then why drag this out? Sylvia, in 2 years together, did Leonard ever tell you he signed an agreement when we married? Her expression didn't waver. She even smiled slightly. I know. He told me. A prenup. Whoever files for divorce loses everything, right? He knew. Something clicked into place. Not surprise, not anger, just a quiet confirmation. He'd told her. Which meant he'd weighed the consequences. He'd done the math and chosen her anyway. He probably thought the agreement was toothless, something a good lawyer could unravel. He probably thought I'd never use it because using it would mean admitting I'd married for reasons other than love, and he knew how much I cared about appearances. He didn't know I'd stopped caring about appearances the night he came home with that pink mark on his neck. Did he also tell you? I set my cup down, the porcelain clicking against the saucer, that the supplemental clause says if he publicly maintains an intimate relationship with another woman while still married, that also counts as forfeiture? Sylvia's smile froze. Just for an instant. If I hadn't been watching her face, I'd have missed it. But her fingers tightened on her water glass, knuckles whitening for a second before she recovered. Miss Shin, I'm not a legal expert. But whether an agreement is enforceable depends on. Sylvia, are you telling me you're not a legal expert? I smiled. You majored in civil and commercial law. You worked at a law firm for 3 years before joining your family's legal department. Your first case was a marital property dispute. You're telling me you don't understand this. Her smile vanished. I looked into you. My voice stayed light as if discussing the weather. Before you came to see me, I made sure to understand who I was dealing with. Sylvia, you didn't come to ask for my blessing. You came to assess, to find out whether I knew about the agreement, whether I'd fight, how long I could hold out. He straightened. The shift was subtle but total. No longer the gracious hostess, but sharp, alert, a cornered animal. Her bodyguards shifted too, as if ready to intervene. What do you really want? Nothing much. I pulled a business card from my bag and slid it across the table. Just a name and a number, no title. Tell Leonard he has 3 days. 3 days to contact my lawyer and settle the divorce according to the agreement. House, car, shares. Everything as we signed 7 years ago. If he doesn't come by then, I'll make the agreement public and go to court. Sylvia looked down at the card. Do you know what that would mean? She lifted her eyes to mine. Leonard publicly acknowledged you as his wife. If you release this agreement, you're humiliating the Liu family in public. Do you think you can stay in this circle afterward? Circle. I repeated the word softly, tasting it. Sylvia, do you think I still care about this circle? The day my father went to prison 7 years ago, this circle expelled me. I held on to Leonard with this agreement. I survived 7 years on it. Now he's torn it up. What else do I have to lose? I leaned forward slightly. You think you're getting a prize? The CEO of Liu Corporation. A man who's proven he can build a company from nothing. But he didn't build it from nothing, Sylvia. He built it from my family's resources. And when you take him, you're taking all that debt with him. The debt he never repaid. The debt he thought he could just walk away from. Sylvia was quiet. She raised her sparkling water, ice clinking. When she set it down, her gaze had shifted. No longer the triumphant calculator, but something more complicated. Wariness mixed with curiosity. Vivian Shin, she said my full name for the first time. Do you think you've won? I didn't say I won. I stood, picking up my coat, and leaned down close to her as I passed. My voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. I just said I'm done losing. Walking out of the French restaurant, afternoon sun broke through the clouds, warming the marble steps. I didn't look back. But I felt Sylvia's gaze through the floor-to-ceiling windows, like a needle on my spine. Ginkgo leaves scattered gold across the sidewalk, crunching under my feet. I walked slowly, my heels keeping a steady rhythm, and remembered that hospital corridor 7 years ago. The fluorescent glare, the sting of antiseptic, the number on my phone that never connected. I didn't die in that corridor. I made it to today. And tomorrow the game would change. The next day Leonard came. He didn't call ahead, just showed up at my apartment building. Security footage showed him pacing outside for nearly half an hour before buzzing the intercom. He was calculating, as always, deciding what posture to take through the door. Eventually he pressed the button. I let him in. He carried the cold with him, coat collar half-turned, unkempt. He looked more tired than 3 days ago, shadows beneath his eyes, a gray stubble on his jaw. He'd been a long time since he looked this disheveled. In the living room I'd brewed tea, 2 cups, one placed across from him. He sat, and the tea's fragrance rose between them, a thin veil of steam. Have you decided? I leaned back on the sofa, watching him across the coffee table. He was quiet for a moment. The lamp cast its glow on his profile, his lashes throwing tiny shadows beneath his eyes. Vivian, even if you take this to court, the agreement might not be fully enforceable. Then sue me. I lifted my cup and took a light sip. Sue me and I'll publish the entire paper trail of every resource you took from my family. The money your father used to broker our marriage. Where did that really come from? His face went pale. Not the irritation of a fox outmaneuvered, but the panic of a man whose carotid was caught between 2 fingers. You think I did nothing all these years? I set the cup down, the clink sharp in the quiet. Leonard, I have records of every transaction, every contract, every deal you made using my father's name. You thought I was having afternoon tea, but I spent 7 years building a file on your financials. He stared at me, his jaw tight. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled a folder from my desk drawer, thick, tabbed, color-coded. I opened it and began to read, my voice calm and steady. June 2018. You used my father's name to secure a bridge loan from Pacific Trust. The actual interest rate was 2 points higher than what you disclosed on your company filing. September 2019. You signed a performance bond with the original guarantor listed as my father, without his knowledge or consent. November 2020. You opened your first nominee account through Blue Harbor Capital, initial deposit $870,000. January 2021. Stop. I looked up. His face was gray. March 2021, I continued, you transferred $4.2 million through the same structure, using Sylvia Ching as the signatory. I have every wire confirmation, every meeting minute, every email. October 2021, another transfer, $1.8 million to a Cayman account. And then there's the matter of the real estate in Sylvia's name, the one you bought with funds that. His hands had started shaking. I could go on, I said. I have 7 years' worth. Every decision you made, every corner you cut, every hand you shook and lied to. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the shell companies. I know about the favors you promised in exchange for introductions, favors you never delivered. I closed the folder. The sound of the cardboard snapping shut was loud in the silence. So when you say the agreement might not be fully enforceable, what you really mean is, you're afraid I'll ruin you in court before the agreement even gets looked at. He raised his head, a faint redness creeping around his eyes. Not tears, but the flush of a man cornered, his last shred of dignity crumbling. Vivian, I don't have to divorce you. I can break it off with Sylvia. We can start over like 7 years ago, you in charge, me handling things. Give me 3 years. Leonard. I said his name softly and he stopped like a machine unplugged mid-cycle. Did you mean that? I held his gaze. Look me in the eyes and say it again. Vivian, let's start over. His eyes met mine for 1 second. Then they shifted away. That shift was the most honest thing I'd seen from him in 7 years. He could tell the whole city Sylvia was his soulmate. He could tell Sylvia he'd handle it. But in this moment across from me he couldn't say the words. Because he knew I wouldn't believe him. Because he didn't believe himself. Leave, I said. My lawyer will send the formal notice in 3 days. He stood, his coat hem brushing his knees. At the door with his back to me, he spoke so low I almost didn't catch it. Vivian, if your father hadn't fallen, you never would have chosen me. Maybe not, I said. But if my father hadn't fallen, I never would have had to settle for you. He flinched. A small, almost imperceptible recoil. Then he pulled the door open and left. I sat in the silence for a long time listening to his footsteps fade. Then I opened the folder again and started reviewing the next section. There was so much more. And he didn't even know the half of it. On the fourth morning, the agreement landed in 7 editors' inboxes before breakfast. I hadn't sent them myself. A trusted friend at an investigative firm handled it. Encrypted routing and IP address pointing to a server that didn't exist. The content was plain. The signed prenup with a short statement of facts. Leonard had signed it 7 years ago. He'd since publicly acknowledged another woman while still married. Per the agreement's terms, he forfeited all property. The story broke like a bomb. Headlines rolled out by noon, from the restrained Lou Corp CEO in property dispute, to the blunt live-in son-in-law could lose everything. By afternoon, finance, society, and entertainment desks were all covering it. Several major news sites pushed it to their front pages. 7-year marriage farce ends. Son-in-law hoist by his own contract. I watched the coverage from my study, scrolling through article after article. The comment sections were pure gold. He didn't say, no comment, when he married into money. Took her family's resources and now wants to walk. Typical. This is embarrassing to watch. The man added the clause himself. Someone check on Vivian. She just won the lottery. A reporter from a major network managed to get a comment from one of Leonard's former business partners. A man who'd never liked him. Leonard Lou, the man said, always thought he was the smartest person in any room. Guess he forgot that paper trails don't have memories but people do. At 3 o'clock, Lou Corp's official account posted a statement, corporate measured, saying the company had no comment on Mr. Lou's personal affairs. Within an hour, thousands of comments flooded in, mocking the carefully worded non-denial. Leonard's legal team fired off a cease and desist that evening, claiming the agreement was materially flawed and signed under duress. At the same time, they offered to negotiate a resolution. 2 claims that told any observer they were bluffing. If the agreement was invalid, why negotiate? I sat in my study, scrolling through the coverage, then turned my phone face down and closed my eyes. Outside, the sky had gone fully dark, scattered office lights like spilled stars, just as they'd been 3 nights ago. My phone vibrated. A number I didn't recognize. Miss Shin, this is Sylvia Ching. I need to speak with you. I didn't reply. She called. I answered. That agreement, was it you? Her voice wavered, struggling to hold its professional composure. Do you realize what this is doing to Leonard? He was called into a board meeting this afternoon. His father called and screamed at him for nearly an hour. I could hear it across the room. He wouldn't be in this position if he'd signed. He said he didn't sign because he thought you'd never actually release it. You were gambling with your last card. Is that what you think this is? I pulled the phone a few inches from my ear. Sylvia, gambling? Let me tell you what else I have. Do you want to hear it? She went silent on the other end. The nominee accounts you helped him set up over the past 2 years. I have the records. My voice was slow, measured. Does the name, Blue Harbor Capital, ring a bell? A sharp intake of breath, like she'd inhaled a shard of glass. You didn't think anyone would notice. You thought because they were offshore they were untouchable. I paused. Sylvia, do you think I survived 7 years of being Mrs. Leonard Lou without learning a thing or two? I know how to build a file. I know how to wait. And I know exactly what it looks like when someone thinks they're cleverer than everyone else. In 2 days, unless he signs the agreement, those statements will appear on your father's desk. After this call, I won't contact you again. You can settle this cleanly with me, or you can wait until your father comes to you. Your choice. The silence that followed wasn't the quiet of thought. It was the silence of someone whose last escape route had just collapsed. After a long moment, I heard a faint click. She'd hung up. I lowered my phone and looked out at the moonlight slipping through the curtain gap, and I breathed out slowly. Sylvia, you think you know Leonard. You think his version, the marriage was for practical reasons, is the whole truth. What he never told you is that he came to me first. He knelt. He said, Vivian, save me. I'll give you everything. She'll never know. Just as she'll never know how much everything was really worth. Leonard showed up on the 6th day. No pacing this time. He buzzed straight in, his voice crackling through the intercom like sandpaper on metal. Vivian, open the door. I opened it. He stood in the doorway, no coat, just a thin black turtleneck, hair a mess, jaw shadowed with more stubble than last time, days without sleep. He clutched a document in his hand, the paper crumpled and soft at the edges. As he stepped inside, the entryway light hit his face and I saw his eyes were red, not from crying but from the burst capillaries of exhaustion and stress. I saw what you released. He tossed the document onto the coffee table, pages fluttering open to the words, divorce agreement. Sylvia's father called this morning. He said if I don't resolve this immediately, Cheng's partnership with me is over. Do you know how much I invested in that relationship? That's your problem. Vivian. His voice cracked, a string finally snapping. What do you actually want? Name a price, I can compensate you another way. It doesn't have to be shares and the house. Then tell me who you are right now to make that offer. He went still. A husband who's been cheating for 2 years? A man who announced his affair in public? Or the man who knelt on the floor 7 years ago and begged me to let him marry into my family? I stepped forward. His pupils shrank. Leonard, do you remember what you said outside my father's study? Vivian, I owe you my life. I'll spend it paying you back. His lips moved soundless. 7 years. What did you pay back with? I held his gaze. With the CEO title. To Sylvia. Or with the clause I circled on that agreement. You came into my life with nothing. I gave you everything. And now you stand here asking me to name a price? The price is simple, Leonard. Everything you took. Every single thing. He was quiet for a long time. His head drooped, shoulders collapsing like someone whose skeleton had been removed piece by piece. The entryway light fell from above, pooling dark shadows beneath his eyes. I'll sign. His voice barely reached me, almost lost beneath the wind outside. I'll sign. But I need one thing from you. What? Don't release Sylvia's nominee accounts. I watched him. He lifted his eyes to mine for a brief second, and in that look I saw humiliation, exhaustion, and something faint I'd never expected from him. Pleading? Remorse? Oh, fear. Real naked fear. The fear of a man who'd finally realized he wasn't in control anymore. Fine. He fished a pen from his pocket, bent over the coffee table and turned the divorce agreement to the last page. The pen hovered, his hand trembled once, and then he wrote his name. I watched the letters form, watched him press down, watched him sign away everything he'd spent 7 years building. He set the pen down. He looked at the signature for a few seconds as if confirming one final fact. Then he turned and walked toward the door. At the entryway his steps stopped. Vivian. His back to me, his voice wrecked beyond recognition. In these 7 years, was there ever one day when you truly thought of me as your husband? I stood in the center of the living room, separated by the coffee table and the quiet broken only by the pen's last scratch. Outside, the wind had picked up, stirring the curtain's edge, moonlight and streetlight tangling on the wall. No, I said. But thank you for teaching me one thing, Leonard. Exactly how cold a person can be. He didn't turn, but his shoulders trembled once. Then he pulled the door open and left. I watched him leave. This man who'd once told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. He meant it to. The problem was, he meant it the way a man means it when he says a good meal is the best thing that ever happened to him. Temporary. Consumable. Forgettable. The door clicked shut. And the house felt for the first time in 7 years like mine. 3 months later, Leonard formally moved out of the home we'd shared for 7 years. I went to clear the apartment that day. The cleaning crew had already done a deep clean. The place was empty. The small traces of him and Sylvia I'd already disposed of. He'd left with little fuss, the only thing remaining on the coffee table being the signed copy of the agreement. I walked through every room. The kitchen where I'd cooked his birthday dinners, the study where I'd worked while he slept, the bedroom where I'd lain awake night after night wondering when he'd come home. Every surface held a memory. But the memories were fading, replaced by something else. The quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, laying thick gold across the floorboards. I stood by the window and watched the moving truck pull away, its bed loaded with a few cardboard boxes and a rolled-up rug. Wind pushed through the half-open window, riffling the agreement's edge with a soft rustle. The phone buzzed. My lawyer. He's contesting the real estate division. Claims the property in his name was acquired separately. Send him the receipts for the down payment. He used my inheritance money. Boss. You have receipts from 7 years ago? From the day he signed the agreement. I kept everything, Mr. Zhou. That's why you're winning. He laughed. A dry, professional laugh. I'll have it filed by end of day. 6 months later, Lu Corp issued a statement announcing Leonard's resignation as CEO for personal reasons. Corporate and restrained, no elaboration. But everyone in the city knew what personal reasons meant. An agreement, a woman, a 7-year farce ended for good. I watched the press conference from my study, a cup of tea in my hand. Leonard looked older than I remembered. The suits still fit, but the confidence was gone. When a reporter asked if the resignation had anything to do with the divorce, he deflected. When another asked about Sylvia Ching, he didn't answer. He just stood there blinking against the cameras, a man who'd lost the only game he'd ever been good at. Later that week, the headlines shifted. Lu Corp's new strategy, moving forward without the founder's son-in-law. Sources confirm, board unanimous in decision to replace CEO. Former CEO's assets seized per prenuptial agreement. I smiled. Then I went back to work. Sylvia left for overseas that spring, taking a position with Ching Group's international division. Reportedly her own decision. I saw her on the airport terminal screens the day she departed. Cream coat, dark glasses covering half her face, 2 assistants trailing her as she hurried through departures. A gust of wind caught a strand of her hair. She tucked it behind her ear, pulled her hat lower and walked quickly through the gate. The news clip lingered for a few seconds, then cut to the next ad. I wondered if she'd ever tell anyone the full story. Probably not. Women like Sylvia don't admit they were played. They just move on to the next game, hoping no one notices the losses they left behind. A week after the news clip aired, I got a call from an assistant I didn't recognize. Mr. Ching Sr. would like to meet with you, Miss Shen. He says it's about a debt that needs acknowledging. I agreed to see him. We met at a quiet tea house in the Eastern District. He was a tall, imposing man in his 60s, silver hair combed back, his demeanor formal but not hostile. Miss Shen, he began after the tea was poured, I won't waste your time with pleasantries. My daughter made a mistake. She involved herself with a man who was not free, and she allowed herself to become entangled in financial arrangements she should have known better than to touch. I said nothing. I'm not here to ask for your mercy, he continued. I'm here to acknowledge that you acted with restraint. You could have made those records public. You didn't. I understand the terms you offered my daughter, and I respect that you kept your word. He slid a small card across the table, his personal number. If you ever need anything, a reference, a connection, someone to vouch for your integrity, you call me. This isn't charity. It's a debt. I took the card and put it in my pocket. Thank you, Mr. Cheng. He nodded once, rose and left. I finished my tea alone, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. A debt. He said it like it was a bad thing. But debts, properly managed, were the foundation of power. And I just collected on the biggest one of all. 3 months after that, I stood in a city I'd never seen before. Autumn sea wind swept in from the bay, briny and cool. In my coat, I stood at the end of a pier, gulls circling above, their wings flashing silver in the sun. The call had come yesterday. All assets transferred. His accounts closed. The car's the only thing left in his name, and that's being repossessed next week. I'd nodded, said thank you and hung up. And now I stood here at the edge of the world watching the waves roll in. The water was gray-green, touched with gold from the setting sun. I'd chosen this city on purpose. A place where no one knew my name, where no one had heard of the Shen family's fall or the Lu family's rise. Where I could start over with nothing but my own name and my own choices. My phone buzzed. My lawyer friend, judgment came through. Full support for our claims. All that's left in his name now is that old car. I replied with a single, Waves lapped below, rising and falling with the patience of something older than memory. I turned and walked back along the pier, the sun sinking behind me, burning the sky into a blend of orange and deep blue. A plane passed overhead, its navigation lights blinking like a moving star. I didn't look back. The city, the 7 years, the people, all of it stayed behind me in the sunset and the sea breeze growing smaller with each step. Wind from the bay lifted my coat hem and loose strands of hair. I tucked them behind my ear and walked on, the steady rhythm of my heels on the wooden planks matching the rhythm of the waves below. At the pier's end, a small cafe faced the harbor, its awning deep blue fluttering in the wind. I pushed through the door, ordered a hot latte and took a seat by the window. Outside, the sun had slipped below the horizon, the last orange glow fading into twilight. Light scattered across the water in fragments, as if someone had crushed the stars and thrown them into the sea. The cafe was quiet, just a few customers scattered at the tables. An old man in a fisherman's cap read a newspaper. A young couple laughed softly in the corner. No one looked at me. No one knew who I was. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo. The empty living room 6 months ago, sunlight streaming across the floor, nothing else left. I locked the screen and put it away. Coffee steam fogged the inside of the glass. I traced an arc with my finger and droplets ran down the line, blurring the view beyond. The cafe radio played an old song, a woman's voice soft and indistinct, the melody flowing through the warm yellow light like the tide. I pushed my chair closer to the window, leaned my head against the cool glass, and watched the horizon shift from orange to deep blue, then slowly closed my eyes. I thought about Leonard. Not with anger, not with pain, but with a kind of distant curiosity. What was he doing now? Living in a rented apartment, probably, counting his losses. Maybe scheming to get back into the game. Maybe realizing for the first time that he'd never actually been good at it, he'd just been good at taking credit for other people's work. Thought about Sylvia. Somewhere in Europe, reinventing herself. She'd find another rich man probably. Another deal to make. She'd never learn because people like her never do. And I thought about myself. 7 years of pretending. 7 years of waiting. 7 years of building a file and keeping a secret. And now this. A new city. A new life. A future that belonged only to me. Gull calls drifted from far away. 1, 2, then swallowed by the waves. I opened my eyes. The sky had gone fully dark now, but the stars were coming out, scattered across the heavens like the lights of the city behind me. I finished my coffee, stood and walked out of the cafe. The pier was quiet. The waves were calm. I stood at the edge looking out at the water and I let myself feel it. The exhaustion, the relief, the quiet, steady joy of being free. 7 years. I finished. No hatred. No regret. I only took back what was mine. The one thing he'd promised me on our wedding day and forgot to deliver. His word. And in taking it back, I'd given myself the one thing he never could. My freedom.